Imagine walking into a courtroom where everyone has already decided you're guilty before you've even spoken a word. Imagine facing two racist police officers who think they've found the perfect victim to frame and a judge who seems more interested in protecting law enforcement than upholding justice. Imagine being a black woman in a system designed to crush people who look like you, but what they don't know is that you have a secret weapon that will turn their entire world upside down. You're about to witness the most shocking courtroom revelation that will leave these corrupt officers speechless and restore your faith in karma. Stay tuned, because what happens next will absolutely blow your mind. Maya Johnson had always known that being a black woman in America meant navigating a world where your very existence could be seen as a threat, but nothing had prepared her for the morning when her life would change forever. As she stood in her kitchen apartment in downtown Atlanta sipping her morning coffee and reviewing case files, Maya had no idea that within hours she would become the center of a legal battle that would expose corruption, shake the foundations of the justice system, and ultimately change her life in ways she never imagined. That 32 years old Maya was one of the most dedicated public defenders in Fulton County. She had spent the last 8 years fighting for clients who couldn't afford private attorneys, representing everyone from teenagers caught with marijuana to adults facing serious felony charges. Maya's passion for justice stemmed from her own family's experiences with the criminal justice system. Her older brother, Malik, had been wrongfully convicted of armed robbery when he was 19 and had spent 3 years in prison before new evidence proved his innocence. The experience of watching her innocent brother navigate the prison system had been traumatic for the entire Johnson family. Maya's parents had spent their life savings on legal fees trying to prove Malik's innocence, while Maya was still in college studying political science at Spelman College. The injustice of seeing her brother's life derailed by a system that presumed his guilt rather than his innocence had motivated Maya to attend law school at Emory University, where she focused on criminal defense and civil rights law. What Maya's colleagues and clients didn't know was that she held a secret that could change everything about how she practiced law. Maya wasn't just a public defender. She was also a licensed federal attorney with the Department of Justice, position she had earned after graduating summa cum laude from law school and completing a prestigious clerkship with federal judge Margaret Williams. Maya had maintained her federal credentials while working as a public defender because she believed that understanding both state and federal law made her a more effective advocate for her clients. Maya's decision to keep her federal attorney status private wasn't about modesty or secrecy. It was a strategic choice that allowed her to work within the system without drawing unwanted attention from prosecutors and judges who might treat her differently if they knew about her federal credentials. Maya had learned early in her career that being underestimated could sometimes be an advantage, especially when dealing with opponents who might let their guard down around someone they perceived as just another overworked public defender. Johnson family had a long history of fighting for civil rights and social justice. Maya's grandfather, Samuel Johnson, had been a prominent civil rights activist in Atlanta during the 1950s and 60s, working alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and other leaders to challenge segregation and discrimination. Samuel had been arrested multiple times for participating in peaceful protests and had endured threats and violence from those who opposed racial equality. His courage and determination had inspired his granddaughter's commitment to justice. Maya's grandmother, Rosa Johnson, had been one of the first black nurses to integrate Grady Hospital in Atlanta. Facing daily harassment and discrimination from white colleagues and supervisors who resented her presence despite the hostile environment, Rosa had persevered, becoming head nurse of her department and mentoring dozens of young black women who followed in her footsteps. The stories of her grandparents' struggles and triumphs had shaped Maya's understanding of both the importance of standing up for what was right and the personal costs that such stands often require. Growing up in Atlanta's old Fourth Ward neighborhood, Maya had witnessed firsthand how the criminal justice system disproportionately affected black families. She had seen friends and neighbors arrested on minor charges that seemed to escalate into serious criminal cases through prosecutorial overreach and inadequate legal representation. She had watched as young men from her community disappeared into the prison system, often for crimes that white teenagers in wealthier Neighborhoods would face minimal consequences for committing. Maya's childhood had been marked by both academic excellence and social consciousness. Parents had instilled in her the importance of education as a tool for advancement, while also teaching her about the systemic barriers that she would face as a black woman in America. Maya had excelled in school, earning scholarships that allowed her to attend Spelman College, where she studied political science and African American studies. During her undergraduate years at Spelman, Maya had become involved in various social justice organizations, including the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the NAACP Youth Council. She had organized protests against police brutality, participated in voter registration drives, and volunteered at legal aid clinics that served low-income communities. These experiences had reinforced her determination to pursue a career in law with a focus on civil rights and criminal defense. Maya's decision to attend Emory University Law School had been motivated by the school's strong clinical programs and its reputation for producing attorneys who were committed to public service. During her first year, she had struggled with the competitive atmosphere and the pressure to conform to traditional legal career paths, but she had found her calling in the criminal defense clinic, where she represented indigent clients facing serious charges. The criminal defense clinic at Emory had provided Maya with hands-on experience in all aspects of criminal practice, from initial client interviews to plea negotiations to trial advocacy. She had worked on cases involving drug possession, domestic violence, theft, and assault, learning how to investigate facts, develop legal theories, and present compelling arguments to judges and juries. More importantly, she had learned how to connect with clients who often came from backgrounds similar to her own. Maya's supervising attorney at the clinic had been Professor David Martinez, a former public defender who had dedicated his career to training the next generation of criminal defense lawyers. Martinez had recognized Maya's exceptional talent and had encouraged her to pursue federal clerkship opportunities that would provide valuable experience in federal court practice. I had also introduced her to Assistant United States Attorney Patricia Williams, who would later become an important mentor. Federal clerkship that Maya had secured with Judge Margaret Williams of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia had been a transformative experience that exposed her to the federal court system and the complex constitutional issues that arose in federal criminal cases. Judge Williams was known for her meticulous attention to detail and her commitment to ensuring that all defendants received fair treatment regardless of their background or the nature of their alleged crimes. During her clerkship, Maya had worked on cases involving white-collar crime, civil rights violations, immigration offenses, and federal drug conspiracies. She had drafted legal memoranda, researched complex constitutional issues, and observed trials that had given her insight into how federal prosecutors built their cases and how federal judges approached sentencing decisions. The experience had also introduced her to the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, where she would later maintain her federal attorney credentials. Judge Williams had become both a mentor and a role model for Maya, demonstrating that it was possible to work within the system while maintaining a commitment to justice and fairness. The judge had encouraged Maya to maintain her federal bar admission even while working as a state public defender, explaining that the knowledge and perspective gained from understanding federal law would make her a more effective advocate, regardless of which court system she practiced in. After completing her clerkship, Maya had been offered positions at several prestigious law firms, but had chosen to accept a job with the Fulton County Public Defender's Office. Despite the significantly lower salary and heavier caseload, the decision had puzzled some of her law school classmates who couldn't understand why someone with her credentials would choose public defense work over the financial rewards of private practice. Maya's early years as a public defender had been challenging but rewarding. She had quickly developed a reputation for thorough preparation, effective courtroom advocacy, and genuine concern for her clients, many of whom were young black men caught up in the criminal justice system through circumstances that were often beyond their control. She had won acquittals in several serious felony cases and had negotiated favorable plea agreements for dozens of clients who might otherwise have faced lengthy prison sentences. One of Maya's most memorable early cases had involved defending a 17-year-old named Marcus Thompson, who had been charged with armed robbery based solely on an eyewitness identification that Maya suspected was unreliable. She had spent weeks investigating the case interviewing witnesses, reviewing surveillance footage, and researching the psychological factors that could affect the accuracy of cross-racial identifications. Her investigation had revealed that the actual perpetrator had been arrested in another jurisdiction, but the prosecutor had been reluctant to drop charges against her client. Maya's methodical approach to the case had ultimately resulted in the charges being dismissed. When she presented evidence that the eyewitness identification had been made under suggestive circumstances and that police had failed to conduct a proper lineup, the case had taught her valuable lessons about the importance of aggressive investigation and had reinforced her belief that zealous advocacy could make a real difference in her client's lives. Her career as a public defender, Maya had handled hundreds of cases ranging from simple drug possession charges to complex fraud schemes. She had represented clients in both state and federal court, using her knowledge of federal law to identify potential constitutional violations and procedural errors that other attorneys might have missed. Her dual expertise had allowed her to achieve better outcomes for her clients and had earned her the respect of judges, prosecutors, and fellow defense attorneys. Maya's reputation for excellence had led to speaking engagements at legal conferences and law schools, where she discussed effective criminal defense strategies and the challenges facing public defenders in an underfunded and overburdened system. She had also written articles for legal journals about the intersection of state and federal criminal law and the importance of zealous advocacy in protecting constitutional rights. Fulton County Public Defender's Office, where Maya worked, was chronically underfunded and overwhelmed with attorneys carrying caseloads that far exceeded recommended standards. The office handled thousands of cases each year, ranging from misdemeanor traffic violations to capital murder charges, with a staff that was stretched to its limits. Despite these challenges, Maya had thrived in the environment, finding fulfillment in representing clients who had been failed by other institutions. Commitment to her clients extended far beyond the courtroom. She frequently visited clients in jail to ensure they understood the legal process and their options. She connected clients with social services, mental health resources, and job training programs, recognizing that addressing underlying issues was often more important than simply winning cases. Her holistic approach to defense work had earned her recognition from both clients and colleagues. Morning that would change Maya's life forever had started like any other. She had awakened at 5:30 in her modest one-bedroom apartment in the Grant Park neighborhood of Atlanta and had begun her daily routine of reviewing case files and preparing for court appearances. Maya's apartment was sparsely furnished but comfortable, reflecting her priorities of helping others rather than accumulating material possessions. Walls of Maya's apartment were covered with photographs of her family, including pictures of her grandparents from their civil rights activism and images of her brother Malik at his college graduation ceremony after his release from prison. Maya kept these photographs as daily reminders of why her work mattered and why fighting for justice was worth the long hours, emotional toll, and financial sacrifice that public defense work required. As Maya prepared for court that morning, she had no way of knowing that she was about to become the victim of the same type of police misconduct that she had spent her career fighting against and representing her clients. She dressed carefully in a navy blue suit that projected professionalism and competence, understanding that her appearance in court could influence how judges and juries perceived both her and her clients. Maya's briefcase contained everything she needed for what she expected to be a routine day in court, including case files for 3 different clients, legal briefs that she had prepared for upcoming motions, and copies of relevant statutes and case law that she might need to reference during hearings. She also carried a small digital recorder that she used to document conversations and observations that might be relevant to her cases. The drive from Maya's apartment to the Fulton County Courthouse normally took about 25 minutes through Atlanta's busy downtown streets. Maya enjoyed this commute because it gave her time to mentally prepare for the challenges ahead and to review her strategy for each case. On her calendar, she listened to news radio during the drive, staying informed about current events that might affect her work or her clients. In this particular morning, Maya was particularly focused on a case involving a young man named Deshaun Williams, who had been charged with drug possession following what she believed was an illegal traffic stop. Maya had spent weeks researching the circumstances of Deshaun's arrest and had discovered inconsistencies in the police reports that suggested the officers had fabricated probable cause for the search. that led to the discovery of drugs. Maya's investigation into Chan's case had revealed a pattern of questionable arrests by the same officers who had stopped him. She had found evidence that officers James Crawford and Michael Rodriguez had been involved in multiple cases where suspects had alleged that evidence was planted or that searches were conducted without proper justification. These patterns suggested that the officers were either incompetent or corrupt, and Maya was determined to expose their misconductors. Maya approached the intersection of Peachtree Street and Auburn Avenue. She noticed that traffic was moving slowly due to construction work that was being performed on one of the main downtown arteries. She changed lanes to avoid the congestion and continued toward the courthouse, maintaining her normal, careful driving habits. Maya was known among her friends and family for being an extremely cautious driver, partly because she understood that any interaction with law enforcement could potentially escalate into something dangerous. Maya's caution behind the wheel stemmed from both her family's experiences with police harassment and her professional knowledge of how routine traffic stops could turn into serious criminal cases. She had represented numerous clients who had been arrested during traffic stops that began with minor violations, but escalated when officers claimed to smell marijuana or alleged that defendants were acting suspiciously. Maya knew that black drivers were disproportionately likely to be stopped, searched, and arrested during such encounter. Such encounters, suddenly flashing red and blue lights, appeared in Maya's rearview mirror, causing her heart rate to increase significantly. Maya initially assumed that the police car was responding to an emergency and moved to the right lane to allow the officer to pass. But instead of passing, the police cruiser pulled directly behind Maya's car and activated a siren, indicating that she was being pulled over for reasons that were completely unclear to her. Maya felt a familiar knot of anxiety form in her stomach as she realized she was about to have an encounter with law enforcement. Despite having done absolutely nothing wrong, she carefully pulled into the parking lot of a closed gas station, turned off her engine, and placed her hands on the steering wheel, where they would be clearly visible to the approaching officers. Maya had been taught these protocols by her parents and had refined them through her professional experience representing clients who had survived police encounters. Two police officers emerged from the patrol car and approached Maya's vehicle with an aggressive demeanor that immediately put her on high alert. The first officer was a tall white man with sandy brown hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to look through her rather than at her. His nameplate read Officer James Crawford, and Maya immediately recognized the name from the Deshaun Williams case that she had been investigating. Second officer was shorter, but more muscular, with dark hair and a permanent scowl that suggested he viewed every interaction as a potential confrontation. His badge identified him as Officer Michael Rodriguez, and Maya realized with growing alarm that these were the same two officers whose conduct she had been investigating in connection with her client's case. The coincidence seemed too significant to be random. Officer Crawford approached the driver's side window while Rodriguez positioned himself near the passenger side, a tactical formation that Maya recognized as an intimidation technique designed to make drivers feel surrounded and vulnerable. Crawford rapped sharply on the window with his knuckle, using more force than was necessary to get Maya's attention, and waited for her to lower the window. Maya immediately complied with the implicit demand to lower her window and greeted the officers in the most professional tone she could manage. Despite her growing anxiety, "Good morning, officers," she said. "Clearly, I'm attorney Maya Johnson. How can I help you today?" Maya's identification of herself as an attorney was both a professional courtesy and a subtle signal that she understood her rights and was not likely to be intimidated easily. Crawford's expression hardened visibly at the mention of Maya's profession, and her polite greeting seemed to irritate him rather than ease the tension that was building around the encounter. "Attorney? Huh," he said, with obvious disdain and contempt. "Another one of those who thinks she's above the law? Just because she has a fancy degree and knows how to talk pretty? I need to see your license, registration, and proof of insurance right now." Maya complied with the request for her documentation, while maintaining her calm, professional demeanor and asking the question that she knew she had every right to ask. "Officer, I was maintaining the speed limit and following all traffic laws as far as I know. Could you please tell me what specific violation I'm suspected of committing. Maya's question was both reasonable and legally appropriate, but it was met with an aggressive response that suggested the officers viewed her assertion of rights as insubordination. "Question us, Lady Rodriguez," snapped as he leaned down to peer into Maya's car through the passenger window. His tone was hostile and threatening in a way that went far beyond what was appropriate for a routine traffic stop. "We don't need to explain ourselves to you or justify. Our actions just do what you're told, and this will go a lot easier for everyone involved." Maya knew that she had every constitutional right to ask why she was being stopped, but she also understood from both her personal experience and her professional knowledge that asserting rights with certain types of officers could escalate situations in extremely dangerous ways. She handed over her documents while discreetly activating the voice recording app on her phone, which was positioned in her lap. Where the officers could not see everything that happened from this point forward, be documented on Maya's phone, providing crucial evidence of the officers' conduct and their violations of her constitutional rights Maya had learned from representing clients who had been victims of police misconduct, that recordings could be the difference between successful prosecutions and cases that were dismissed due to lack of evidence. Crawford barely glanced at Maya's identification documents before stuffing them into his shirt pocket in a dismissive manner that suggested he had no intention of conducting a proper review of her credentials. "We've received reports of suspicious activity in this area," he said in a tone that suggested he was already convinced of her guilt. "Vehicles matching your description have been involved in drug transactions and other criminal activity." Maya felt a surge of anger at what was obviously a fabricated justification for the stop, but she forced herself to remain calm and professional, knowing that any display of emotion could be used against her later. "Officer, I'm a criminal defense attorney on my way to court for scheduled hearings. I can assure you that I'm not involved in any illegal activity, and I would be happy to provide you with my business card or contact information for my office." Maya's professional credentials and offer to provide verification seemed to further anger both officers, who exchanged glances that suggested they were communicating silently about how to proceed with an encounter that was not going according to their expectations. Crawford returned to Maya's window with increased hostility, while Rodriguez moved closer to the driver's side door. "Criminal defense attorney, even worse," Rodriguez said with a sneer that revealed his contempt for Maya's profession. "You're one of those lawyers who helps criminals get away with their crimes and makes honest, hard-working cops look bad. We know all about your type, always trying to find technicalities and loopholes to protect the guilty." Maya realized that this encounter had moved far beyond a routine traffic stop and had become a confrontation based on the officers' apparent hostility toward defense attorneys and quite possibly their racial bias. She continued to record everything while maintaining her calm, professional demeanor. Despite the increasingly threatening behavior of both officers, Crawford returned to Maya's window and issued an order that she knew was legally questionable. "Step out of the vehicle right now," he commanded. "We need to conduct a search of your car and your person to make sure you're not carrying any drugs or weapons." Maya knew that she had Fourth Amendment rights that protected her from unreasonable searches, but she also knew that asserting those rights with these particular officers could result in violence. "Officer, I'd like to know on what specific legal grounds you're requesting a search of my vehicle," Maya said in the calmest voice she could manage. "Do you have probable cause to believe that I've committed a crime, or do you have a warrant authorizing such a search?" Maya's question was legally appropriate and demonstrated her knowledge of constitutional law, but it clearly angered both officers' who seemed to view Maya's knowledge of her constitutional rights as an act of defiance and insubordination. Crawford stepped back from the window and placed his hand on his service weapon while Rodriguez moved closer to the driver's side door in a formation that was clearly designed to intimidate Maya into compliance. "Get smart with us, Lady Rodriguez," threatened in a voice that carried clear implications of violence. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, and trust me, you don't want to find out what the hard way looks like. Your choice, counselor, but choose quickly, because my patience is running out." Maya understood that she was being directly threatened with physical violence if she continued to assert her constitutional rights. She also knew that her phone was still recording, and that any illegal actions by the officers would be documented for potential federal prosecution later, despite every instinct telling her to continue fighting. Maya decided that discretion was the better part of valor against her better judgment, but fearing for her physical safety, Maya complied with the officer's demands and stepped out of her car, understanding that any resistance could result in serious injury or death. Crawford immediately spun Maya round and pressed her roughly against her vehicle, while Rodriguez began searching through her belongings with unnecessary aggression and hostility. Maya winced as Crawford's hands roughly patted her down in what felt more like an assault than a proper police procedure. She remained silent and compliant, knowing that anything she said could be twisted against her later, and that the recording on her phone was capturing evidence of the officer's misconduct that could be used in subsequent legal proceedings. Search of Maya's vehicle was thorough, invasive, and clearly designed more to humiliate and intimidate than to discover evidence of criminal activity. Both officers treated her professional materials and personal belongings as if they were evidence of criminal activity. Rodriguez actually dumped out Maya's briefcase, scattering legal documents across the dirty parking lot, while Crawford rifled through her purse and glove compartment. Maya watched in horror and growing anger as the officers continued to rifle through her personal possessions, treating her legal documents and professional materials like garbage. The behavior was clearly designed to send a message that they could humiliate and intimidate her whenever they chose, and that her status as an attorney meant nothing to them. After 20 minutes of intensive searching that yielded absolutely nothing illegal or suspicious, the officers seemed frustrated by their complete failure to discover any evidence that would justify their aggressive behavior. Crawford gathered up Maya's scattered documents and shoved them roughly back into her briefcase, while Rodriguez returned to the patrol car to run her license through their computer system. Rodriguez returned from the computer. His expression had changed slightly, and he whispered something urgent to Crawford, who glanced at Maya with what might have been uncertainty or concern. Rodriguez announced that Maya's license was completely clean, with no outstanding warrants, violations, or negative information. This news seemed to frustrate the officers rather than satisfy them. Crawford approached Maya one final time, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper that was clearly intended to intimidate her. "Listen very carefully, counselor," he said, spitting the professional title like a curse word. "We know who you are now, and we know where you work. This community doesn't need more lawyers stirring up trouble against hardworking police officers who are just trying to do their jobs." Maya felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that Crawford was essentially threatening her for being a defense attorney in her own city and practicing law in ways that apparently displeased local law enforcement. The threat was clear and unambiguous. They would retaliate against her if she continued to represent clients in ways that challenged police conducts. Officers returned Maya's documents, but not before Crawford had deliberately bent her driver's license and Rodriguez had dropped her vehicle registration in a dirty puddle, leaving it soaked and partially illegible. These petty acts of vandalism were clearly intended to send a message that they could make her life difficult and inconvenient whenever they chose to do so. As the patrol car finally pulled away, Maya stood alone in the parking lot, trying to process what had just happened to her. She had been illegally detained, searched without probable cause, threatened for practicing law, and subjected to petty harassment by two police officers who seemed to view her profession as an enemy rather than a component of the justice system. Maya gathered her belongings and sat in her car for several minutes, working to calm herself and process the full implications of what had occurred. She had just experienced firsthand the kind of police misconduct that her clients often described, but that judges and prosecutors frequently dismissed or ignored. The irony was not lost on her. The recording on Maya's phone had captured the entire encounter, providing clear evidence of multiple constitutional violations, including illegal detention, unlawful search, and threats against her for exercising her professional duties. The evidence would be crucial in any subsequent legal action, but Maya knew that challenging police misconduct could be dangerous and difficult. As Maya drove to the courthouse, her mind was racing with thoughts about how to respond to what had clearly been a deliberate act of harassment and intimidation. She could file complaints with Internal Affairs, contact the Civil Rights Division of the Department of justice or pursue civil litigation against the officers in the department, but she also knew that such actions often resulted in retaliation. At the courthouse, Maya attempted to focus on her scheduled hearings and client meetings, but found herself distracted by the morning's events and their implications for both her safety and her ability to effectively represent her clients. Her colleague Jerome Washington noticed her distracted state and asked if everything was okay. Jerome was a fellow public defender who had become one of Maya's closest friends and confidants at the office. He was a few years older than Maya and had grown up in Atlanta's Summerhill neighborhood before attending law school at Georgia State University. Jerome specialized in juvenile defense work and had developed particular expertise in cases involving young people who had been failed by various social institutions. Maya briefly explained to Jerome what had happened during her encounter with Crawford and Rodriguez without revealing the full extent of her plans for addressing the situation. Jerome was outraged on Maya's behalf and suggested that she immediately file complaints with every available oversight body, but Maya knew that a more strategic approach would be necessary. Maya spent her lunch break researching the legal options available to her as both a victim of civil rights violations and as an attorney. With access to federal resources, she discovered that the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice had recently increased its focus on police misconduct cases and was actively investigating departments with patterns of constitutional violations. The next several days, Maya researched officers Crawford and Rodriguez extensively, discovering a disturbing pattern of complaints and lawsuits that had been filed against both men over the course of their careers. They had been involved in multiple excessive force incidents, questionable searches, and allegations of racial bias, yet both remained on active duty with minimal disciplinary action. Maya also discovered that several other attorneys, particularly Black and Latino lawyers, had reported similar encounters with these same officers over the past few years. The pattern strongly suggested that Crawford and Rodriguez were specifically targeting legal professionals who they viewed as threats to their ability to operate without oversight or accountability. Maya's research revealed that Crawford had been the subject of 6 internal affairs investigations in the past 7 years, including 3 for excessive force, 1 for falsifying a police report, and 2 for conducting illegal searches, yet he had never been disciplined beyond brief suspensions. With Rodriguez had a similarly troubling record with 4 excessive force complaints and multiple allegations of conducting unconstitutional searches. Lack of meaningful accountability for these officers reflected broader problems within the Atlanta Police Department, which had been under federal oversight for civil rights violations in the past. Maya realized that her case could potentially contribute to a pattern in practice investigation that might result in comprehensive systemic reforms. Maya began meticulously documenting everything related to her encounter with Crawford and Rodriguez. She transcribed the audio recording, made detailed notes about the physical evidence of the illegal search, and researched the specific legal standards that applied to police stops and searches. Her federal law background allowed her to identify multiple constitutional violations that had occurred 2 weeks after the incident. Maya was working late at her office when she received an unexpected phone call from someone who identified himself as Detective Angela Martinez with the Atlanta Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. Martinez explained that other complaints involving Crawford and Rodriguez had prompted an investigation, and Maya's name had somehow come up as a potential witness. Detective Martinez was a 20-year veteran of law enforcement who had built a solid reputation for conducting thorough and impartial investigations. She had previously worked on several high-profile cases involving police corruption and had successfully brought charges against officers who had violated department policies and constitutional rights. Martinez seemed genuinely concerned about the pattern of complaints against the 2 officers. Maya agreed to meet with Detective Martinez the following day to provide her account of the encounter. She spent that evening organizing her documentation and preparing a comprehensive statement that would detail every aspect of her interaction with Crawford and Rodriguez, including their threatening language and obvious bias. Meeting with Detective Martinez revealed that Crawford and Rodriguez were under investigation for multiple civil rights violations involving a pattern of targeting minority professionals, including doctors, lawyers and business owners, the investigation had been prompted by complaints from at least 10 other victims, who had described similar encounters involving harassment, intimidation, and illegal searches Maya provided. Her audio recording and detailed written statement to Detective Martinez, who seemed genuinely shocked by the clarity of the evidence and the obvious misconduct that had documented Martinez, explained that the department was coordinating with federal authorities to ensure that any prosecution would be handled at the appropriate level given the serious civil rights implications. Martinez also warned Maya that Crawford and Rodriguez might attempt to retaliate once they learned about the investigation and her cooperation with internal affairs. She suggested that Maya vary her daily routine and be particularly cautious when driving through areas where the officers typically patrolled. This warning confirmed Maya's suspicions about the officers' willingness to abuse their authoritative federal investigation that resulted from the internal affairs inquiry uncovered evidence of widespread misconduct within the unit where Crawford and Rodriguez worked. The investigation revealed that the officers had been systematically targeting successful African Americans and Latinos, particularly those in professional occupations who they viewed as threats to their authority. Maya learned that one of the other victims was Dr. Patricia Williams, a prominent cardiologist who had been stopped and searched 5 times in 8 months, always without probable cause, and always in a manner designed to humiliate and intimidate Dr. Williams had initially been reluctant to file complaints, but decided to come forward after learning about the investigation. Victim was attorney David Chin, a civil rights lawyer who had been subjected to repeated harassment, including having his law office inspected multiple times by various city agencies after he complained about his treatment by Crawford and Rodriguez. These cases demonstrated that the officers' misconduct was part of a broader pattern of retaliation against anyone who challenged their authority. Over the following weeks, Maya noticed unmarked police cars parked near her office and apartment building on multiple occasions. She began documenting these apparent surveillance activities and shared her observations with Detective Martinez, who confirmed that the officers were likely trying to find grounds for another encounter or arrest. Situation escalated dramatically when Maya received a phone call at her office from someone claiming to be a potential client who needed urgent legal representation. The caller asked to meet with Maya at a coffee shop in the area where Crawford and Rodriguez normally patrolled. When Maya arrived at the meeting location, no client appeared, but she noticed Officer Rodriguez watching her from across the street. Maya immediately realized that this had been a setup designed to place her in Crawford and Rodriguez's patrol area where they could initiate another encounter and potentially arrest her on fabricated charges. She quickly left the area and contacted Detective Martinez to report the incident. This confirmed that the officers were actively targeting her for retaliation. Detective Martinez informed Maya that federal authorities were prepared to move forward with charges against Crawford and Rodriguez, but needed her to play a specific role in gathering additional evidence that would strengthen their case. Maya would need to allow herself to be arrested by the officers while wearing a concealed recording device so that their conduct could be fully documented. Plan was extremely risky, but Maya understood that, without concrete evidence of the officers' willingness to fabricate charges and abuse their authority, the case might not result in the kind of serious consequences that would prevent future misconduct. She agreed to participate, knowing that her federal attorney credentials would ultimately protect her from lasting legal consequences. Maya spent several days preparing for the undercover operation, working closely with federal agents to ensure that her safety would be protected and that all evidence would be properly documented. The plan required precise timing and coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies, including the FBI and the Civil Rights Division. On the designated day, Maya drove through Crawford and Rodriguez's patrol area. Wearing a concealed recording device provided by federal agents, she followed a predetermined route that would place her in locations where the officers could observe her and potentially initiate another encounter. Federal agents were positioned nearby, ready to intervene. If the situation became dangerous, Maya didn't have to wait long before the familiar red and blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror for the second time. Crawford and Rodriguez had taken the bait and were pulling her over in almost exactly the same location where the first encounter had occurred. Maya pulled over in a spot where backup officers could observe and intervene if necessary. This second encounter began, much like the first, with Crawford and Rodriguez approaching her vehicle aggressively and demanding her identification, but this time Maya was prepared to reveal information that would shock them into exposing their true motivations and willingness to fabricate charges. Against someone they viewed as a threat, Crawford repeated his demand that Maya step out of the vehicle. For another search, Maya calmly informed the officers that she would comply with their demands, but wanted to document that she was being detained without probable cause and searched without her consent. She also mentioned that she had recently been in contact with federal authorities about civil rights violations. This statement clearly agitated both officers, who seemed to realize that Maya was not the helpless victim they had assumed her to be. Rodriguez stepped forward and accused Maya of threatening police officers and interfering with their investigation, charges that were completely fabricated, but provided them with justification for arresting her. Crawford placed Maya under arrest for the completely fabricated charges, handcuffing her with unnecessary roughness and making additional derogatory comments about lawyers who thought they were above the law. Rodriguez searched her car again, finding nothing illegal but claiming that Maya's legal documents were somehow evidence of criminal activity. As Maya was placed in the back of the patrol car, she could see federal agents positioning themselves nearby, ready to intervene if the situation became dangerous. The officers drove Maya to the local precinct, where she was processed and charged with obstruction of justice and interfering with a police investigation. Both charges were completely without merit. Maya spent 4 hours in a holding cell before being released on her own recognizance. The charges against her were serious enough to potentially damage her legal career if they weren't resolved properly, but Maya knew that the recorded evidence would ultimately clear her name and destroy the officers' credibility during her time in the holding cell. Maya observed the treatment of other arrestees, many of whom were young black men who had been arrested on minor charges. She witnessed guards making racially charged comments and treating prisoners with unnecessary harshness. These observations strengthened her resolve to pursue comprehensive systemic changes. The next morning, Maya received a call from Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Williams, who was leading the federal investigation. Williams informed Maya that the recordings from her arrest provided more than sufficient evidence to charge Crawford and Rodriguez with civil rights violations under federal law. The officers had clearly demonstrated a pattern of targeting Maya because of both her race and her profession. Williams also explained that Maya's cooperation and courage had helped build a much stronger case against the officers, and that federal prosecutors were extremely confident they could secure convictions. The charges against Maya would be dropped immediately, and she would be compensated for her cooperation in the dangerous undercover operation. Assistant U.S. Attorney Williams was herself a Harvard Law School graduate who had built her entire career prosecuting civil rights violations and public corruption cases. She had successfully prosecuted dozens of law enforcement officers for constitutional violations and had developed a national reputation for thorough preparation and aggressive prosecution of police misconduct cases. 2 weeks later, Crawford and Rodriguez were arrested by federal agents at their homes and charged with conspiracy to violate civil rights, deprivation of rights under color of law, and making false statements to federal investigators. The arrests made front-page news throughout Georgia, with Maya's case highlighted as an example of effective federal civil rights enforcement. The arrests sent shockwaves through the Atlanta Police Department as officers realized that their conduct would be subject to intense federal scrutiny. The police union immediately began organizing legal defense for Crawford and Rodriguez, while also launching a public relations campaign to discredit the federal investigation. The arraignment hearing for Crawford and Rodriguez drew significant media attention, with civil rights groups and legal organizations showing strong support for Maya and the other victims. Maya attended the hearing to observe as the two officers who had seemed so powerful and intimidating now stood before a federal judge. Facing serious federal criminal charges, both officers initially pleaded not guilty, and their attorney attempted to portray them as dedicated public servants who had made minor mistakes in judgment. However, the federal prosecutor presented evidence of such a clear pattern of racial targeting and abuse of authority that it went far beyond any conceivable mistakes. The defense attorney was Martin Fletcher, a former federal prosecutor who specialized in representing law enforcement officers accused of misconduct. Fletcher had a national reputation for aggressive tactics and had successfully defended several officers in high-profile cases, but the evidence against Crawford and Rodriguez was simply overwhelming during the preliminary hearing. Federal prosecutors played extensive recordings of Maya's encounters with Crawford and Rodriguez, revealing the officers' threatening language, obvious racial bias, and clear willingness to fabricate charges. The evidence was so compelling that the defense attorney immediately began exploring possible plea agreements. Maya was called to testify about her experiences and found herself facing the two officers, who had once seemed so menacing and powerful. Now they appeared small and vulnerable, sitting at the defendant's table while she spoke from the witness stand. With the authority of someone who thoroughly understood both the law and justice, Maya's testimony was measured and professional, focusing on the facts of her encounters. Rather than seeking personal revenge, she described the illegal searches, the threats, the retaliation, and the fabricated charges, providing the court with a clear and comprehensive picture of how the officers systematically abused their authority. Under cross-examination, the defense attorney attempted to suggest that Maya had somehow provoked the officers or that her legal knowledge made her a difficult person.